Welcome to the Teacher's Compass podcast. I'm your host, Louise Schwartz, a former teacher turned entrepreneur, and I'm here to offer guidance, direction, and practical support for teachers and teaching assistants who are feeling overwhelmed and questioning their place in education. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Teacher's Compass podcast. And I am joined today by the lovely Jenny Sharp, who we have connected on Facebook, and we seem to have so much in common and a joint goal to help teachers. So I thought it'd be really good to have a chat with Jenny today and see what she can share with us and some knowledge that we can take forward in our sort of teaching careers and our lives to sort of just help us be a happier, overall, generally jollier person. That's our plan for today. So hello, Jenny. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Yeah.
Good to hear. So my first question is, what took you into teaching? What made you decide to want to be a teacher? And how did that kind of process start? Tell us a bit about it.
Okay, so it was a bit of a scratch that I needed to itch, or itch that I needed to scratch rather. Right way around with Cal, wouldn't it? It was something I always told my husband, don't ever let me be a teacher. Because my mum became a teacher, maths teacher, when I was about 9, so she trained in long hours, and it wasn't a very pleasant experience as her daughter. But surprise, surprise, when my daughter hit 8, 9, I thought the same thing. I needed or I wanted some sort of career, because I'd had a little thing early 2000s and related to my degree. And then there was bringing up children, and I needed an intellectual, brain stimulating thing. And I'm not saying bringing up children is not fulfilling at all. I'm not saying that. But for me, I needed something. So I'd had a little part-time job, a sort of a bit of a practice manager in a massagey osteopath place. And I was like, it wasn't enough. So initially I had an interview to be a maths teacher, or a pre-interview. And they said, well, you might be placed like an hour away for your placement. And I was like, can't do that. And a year later, I reapplied, but as a computing teacher, because there was a computer with a different university in York, because there's more than one in York. And they didn't tell me where my placements might be. And you're going to guess, the placement was an hour away from home.
Right.
This time I dedicated myself and I was like, no, I'm going to do this. And I thought it was interesting because it was a different subject. So it was, again, connected sort of with my degree, but a bit more practical than maths would be for me. It felt like it was going to be a bit more of an application.
Yeah.
And so I went for it, and that itch was definitely scratched.
Yeah, tick that box. That's really interesting that you'd said, as the daughter of a teacher about the age of 9, that it wasn't an enjoyable experience for you. Did that impact the way that you then trained and became a teacher because of your daughter?
I think I probably had similar experiences. I probably dumped the same stuff on her, but what I didn't do was work as late into the night as my mum had to do. But that was partly the invention, the technology changed.
Yeah.
So some things were faster.
Yeah.
But certainly I was aware of the impact I was having. And I don't know whether my mum had been at the time, probably. But because of being a daughter of a teacher, it was right there up front and centre.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Like, my daughter has expressed an interest in teaching. I mean, she's 12 now, and I've sort of said to her, no, don't go into teaching, don't do that, steer clear. But I think maybe it's that thing inside us that thinks, that's who we're meant to be. That's the sort of person we are. And teaching's that way to sort of express that in a way, really.
I did wonder, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? So you trained sort of well before COVID, but we were chatting last week about how COVID had an impact and sort of changed your career. Just sort of tell us a little bit about your experiences of teaching in COVID.
Oh yeah, massively, because so obviously remote.
Yeah.
It was really hard to get engagement with students. You were potentially teaching more people because they'd be like, okay, it's computing now. And I can't remember whether there ended up being more than 30, but I would monitor who was there. It felt like quite a burden. It was quite difficult. And obviously you were away from the students. So there was a different interaction.
Yeah.
So that period, you kind of got used to it. You got used to a bit of independence at home, a bit of flexibility. Certain things I felt were more my responsibility than they had been when I was in the classroom. So I felt a bit more responsible for the whole of Key Stage 3 during that, which hadn't been how it was before. yeah, so it was a very different experience. And then going back into the classroom, it was a bit of a culture shock. And I'm sure it was for everybody going back into the workplace. But for me, that was a difficult culture shock. And that first day back was, yeah, I imagine other teachers kind of listening to this will be going, yeah, I remember that day.
Yeah.
You can't shut it out of your mind. And that was really, yeah, it was really hard. So the whole teaching during COVID was hard, but the going back to school was also differently hard.
Yeah. And how long did you sort of remain in teaching after COVID? So I left last year, 2024. And for me, even last year, there are still some sort of procedures that were put in place because of COVID that are still happening in schools now and having an impact, sort of 4 or 5 years down the line.
So I'm trying to pinpoint, so I can't remember. This is a silly thing. I should have checked before I come on today whether I trained for coaching in January 21 or January 22, but it was one of those two. But it was after COVID. I had gone back to work and I can't remember. I think it might have been. So when did we go back? Do you remember? Was it like the September?
I think some schools went back with,
Or did we go
yes,
back
it
in
was September
September?
20. Oh, that's a good question. I
You
can't
can't
remember
remember
now.
either.
Because I know we had another little mini lockdown in 2021. Because when my husband had his first heart attack, I was at home and that was due to COVID, and I couldn't go to the hospital because that was locked down. So I think there was a time in 2021. It all blurs into one
It
time.
blurs into one. So essentially, the September, my final September, there were a few things. So it was related to coming back to work. So whether or not I'd been back a year or whether I'd just been back a few weeks, I can't
Yeah.
quite remember. But my timetable had changed. I applied to be head of department, but again, I can't remember when that happened in chronological order. So I'd
Right.
applied to be head of department, didn't get it, and so there was like at my age, because being not having been a career teacher right the way from university,
Yeah.
I was like, well, at my age, I probably only want to be head of department for X number of years, and I don't. So this was the kind of one of the crunch points. I didn't get it. So what do I do? Do I stay? Do I go to another school and try go straight into head of department? But that wouldn't have been here in York, and I didn't want to be anywhere else.
Yeah.
So there were lots of like little different things. Um, for some reason, I wasn't given any year 10 students or year 12. So I was only going to be finishing off the year 11s, and that was it. So it felt like there wasn't going to be 2 years consistency for another exam set like the year
Yeah.
after. There was a bit of me that was like, I like a year 12 or a year 10 class to
Yeah.
be able to take through for 2 years. But on the other side, I was like, well, if I don't have one, then this is a decision point for me.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that enabled me to think, okay, what do I want to do here? And so I did hand my notice in that October for Christmas,
Yeah.
knowing I'd be leaving a year 11 class behind, but knowing because I didn't have the year 10s or year 12s that it wasn't going to be as big an impact as it might have been on any other year.
Yeah.
Um, I also had a couple of classes that were really hard work, a couple of things, and we'll go into that because I think that was another thing you
Yeah.
wanted to talk about. So it felt like there were a few things that I was like, well, if this happens, then, and there were two or three different things, including applying for a little like associate working with trainee teachers at a university, but remotely, that would fit in as well. And I
Yeah.
got that, and that was another shall I, shan't I? If I get it, then I will.
Yeah.
And there were a few different things that I got that I was like, no, I'm going to.
So there wasn't necessarily one thing that sort of made you think, I'm going to step away from teaching, but sort of a series of events over a period of time that led to that decision of, actually, I'm going to step out of the classroom.
Yeah, so I wasn't for well, I felt there was a little bit of I felt a bit squished out, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't want to say that was intentional because I don't think it was. Um, there were a couple of little events, but I won't go into them because there's no point. But a little couple of things that happened in school that I didn't feel were very fair.
Hmm.
And so just ended up with a few clashes that went on. But at the end of the day, it was a series of events rather than the one thing that happened.
Singular thing. Yeah, that makes sense. So what did that take you into then? You were talking about doing some work with some trainee teachers and things. What did you go into after you left the classroom?
Yeah, so what I'd decided is once I'd handed my notice in, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'd already been doing a bit of tutoring, so a little bit of computer science GCSE tutoring, and I'd done some maths tutoring already, like in the previous year or so. And I was like, well, I'm going to continue that, and I still do that now. But also, I can't remember how it was. I think I'd seen somebody on LinkedIn that I knew who trained to be a coach.
Ah,
And in my teaching, I'd had 2 or 3 experiences of coaching. So my first year as a teacher, I'd gone through a coaching cycle. I'd the last year of teaching, or maybe the one before that, we'd had coaching was the CPD method
yeah,
of helping people, working through what you wanted to do and how you wanted to progress and any difficulties you were having.
yeah.
And I was like, I saw this person on LinkedIn and I got in touch with her. And I was like, okay, who did you train with? How did it go? What were the benefits? And asked her some questions. And I was like, uh-huh, I think I maybe want to do this. And so before I'd actually finished teaching, I'd applied because it was that January straight afterwards that I went straight into it.
Wow.
So I trained from January to May of that year, May, June. Incidentally, I had appendicitis during my training of becoming a coach, and that was a bit of a
Oh,
just like an
blimey.
extra thing that kind of put a spanner in the works.
Yeah.
Um, but whereas with teaching, I wouldn't have been able to keep going.
Yes.
I think I missed one morning of the course, and I
Oh,
because I
wow.
was in hospital, but I could keep going.
That's
Um,
amazing, isn't it? And
yeah.
do you find that there's quite a lot of similarities between teaching and coaching? Because I feel like a lot of teachers, although we're not necessarily trained as coaches, we do still offer that kind of coaching style and approach to students that we teach.
Yeah, I think so. I think if so I'm also currently working with some trainee teachers and I think I'm instilling a better coaching approach with them, kind of helping them more what coaching is. So you're asking questions, you're not telling.
Yeah.
So it's the resilience, the idea generating, the problem solving, putting that on the students. And I think as a teacher, I probably held too much of that myself and didn't put enough on the students.
Yeah.
So learning as a coach that you don't solve anybody's problems if that's not your role. It probably would have made me a better teacher if I'd known how to coach first.
That's really
Um,
interesting, isn't it?
Isn't
I
it?
wonder if more teachers should
Yeah.
be trained as coaches with that approach.
Well, I think so. I think so, definitely, because it prevents you from trying to solve everybody's problems
Mm,
because you learn to stand back. I still give an awful lot in my coaching, um, but that's all in crafting the questions and working out where you're going to go,
yeah.
which is subtly different. You're not trying to impart a certain bit of knowledge. But definitely there are quite a number, I would say, of skills. And I think if teachers were taught coaching better, so the people who were trying to deliver the coaching in schools had longer training, which they wouldn't
Mm.
be able to unless a coach came in and delivered it, to be honest. But if they were able to do that better, then yeah, I think teachers would be better as a result as well.
That's really interesting. Because I did my teacher training so long ago, and I went straight to university. I did my music degree, and then I did my PGCE. I don't think that element of coaching has necessarily occurred to me until recently. That actually, when you're training, you don't really get kind of guided in how to do that unless you're naturally that sort of person that can kind of, support students. You just have to pick it up on the job, don't you? There's no sort of training in that. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Love it. So, my next question is quite a lot of teachers feel stuck where they are. And so, this is something that I want to help teachers with get out of this position of being stuck and feeling like you're a bit lost and overwhelmed. How do you do that through your coaching?
So would that be people who are contemplating leaving teaching, or would that be people who are feeling stuck in teaching?
Probably a bit of both. Do you work with teachers that are in both of those scenarios?
Yeah, I so obviously at the moment my it's mainly trainee teachers. So I've the only person actually kind of in the teaching world I'm thinking of. I've worked with a few people who contemplated leaving,
Yeah.
but I've worked with one person who was a Senko, so that was a little bit different. And she was just surrounded by it was just overwhelm and a struggling with delegating.
Mm,
So that was kind of hers, not being able to trust somebody because of the responsibility,
mm,
um, being able to delegate to other people, to new members of staff and things like that. So it was subtly different. But I think teachers not knowing if they could leave, what would they do? So I would say that's a big stuck moment, especially if they've, like you, just come straight out of university, straight into teaching. It's like, well, I've never done anything else.
Absolutely.
Um, and I think I faced that with current clients who've been like in the same industry for 15, 20 years.
Mm.
What else could I do? So I do see that with my like the majority of my clients, that something like that comes up. Um, and it's generally, yeah, transferable skills. I
Mm.
just feel stuck. I've lost confidence. All those sort of things come up. Um, and how I help people with that is we'll do maybe a career journey in this beautiful room I have here. We'll do quite a physical activity of walking through, even if you've been in the same job the whole place or the whole school, the same school the whole time, walking through the different roles you've had and what skills you've gained. So it might be, you've become head of department. Okay, what did that involve? And then turning that into more business speak, project management, leadership, all of those kind of more career industry buzzwords as opposed to teaching buzzwords. And then working out how to kind of quantify that. And so to build the confidence that actually you've got really, really, really transferable skills in loads of different areas.
And I think that's something that teachers don't necessarily realize. They just think, oh, I've been a teacher here, I've run this project here, or I've stepped up and been a leader. That actually a lot of those skills that teachers acquire over their careers are very transferable into other industries and into business because they've sort of picked up so much along the way, haven't they? But I think maybe you were talking about confidence, and that was certainly something that I suffered with towards the sort of end of my teaching career. My confidence really dipped, and I didn't believe that I was capable of doing anything else other than teaching music because that was all I'd ever done. That's all I'd ever known. And I just felt like, what else is there to learn?
Which is crazy because teachers are so good at multitasking. I
Yeah.
remember sitting in a hospital once waiting at A&E and seeing how many members of staff were just stood around. And I'm, well, that would never happen in a school. Teachers are so under pressure that they are so good at doing all of these things at once. It's like if teachers were kind of like taken out of schools and put everywhere else would be better.
Absolutely, and everything would run much smoother because teachers are very good at finding the most efficient way to do something because time is so precious and you've got sort of 10 different jobs that need doing. You find the most efficient way to do each one, saves everybody loads of time. Yeah, we should
Yeah,
distribute them to every
definitely.
different industry, shouldn't we? Teachers
That's
running the
what I
whole
was thinking.
world.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. The skills you gain because of the pressure you're under are
Yeah,
just incredible.
yeah, absolutely. How do you work with some of your clients to build that confidence back up? If a teacher's lost confidence in themselves and their own abilities, what kind of tips could you give them to work on that to build their confidence back up?
So we do a beautiful, it's like quite a beautiful embodiment. I don't like all these buzzwords, but what I mean by that is we have the hula hoop circle of excellence. Um, so yeah, so what I do is I ask them about a time when they're really confident. So imagine any time, anywhere, it doesn't matter, and then describe what they're wearing, what they can see, what they can hear. So often do it with their eyes shut. What they can see, what they can hear, what anything they could smell. Is it winter? Is it summer? Can you feel the sun? Like asking all these questions. And then when they feel they've really got that, imagine a time that then think of a time when they're not going to be confident. So think of one of those things that's really making them panic right now.
Mm.
And that circle of excellence is when we're wearing the confident clothing, how's your hair? Have you got makeup on? Asking all those little tiny questions. And then we put that back on and they step into the circle, into the place where they are going to feel like they're not confident.
Like it.
Often they jump straight back out again, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. So, okay, we do that again, 2 or 3 times, or as many times as it takes. And eventually they will be able to step into that circle carrying that confidence. And so it's a little trick. So I do that one, which is obviously a very physical one, but there's another one about recording yourself before something you're nervous about, talking on a video, all the stuff that you're worried about, and then videoing yourself afterwards
Ah, I
and
like
watching
that
and
idea.
watching back.
Yeah,
Because the afterwards is like, oh, you stupid woman. You could do that. It was absolutely fine. And this is why it was fine.
yeah.
Um, and I recorded a whole podcast on that, all about that actually, not so long ago.
That's
Because
amazing.
it
I
is
like
such a
that.
good tech. It's using tech, really simple tech, your phone,
Yeah.
to record your feelings beforehand, notice the nerves, and then notice actually it was just unfounded. So both of those techniques work differently, but they both work really, really well.
That's a really good way of, like you say, using what you've got around you to just support that kind of that idea that actually, yeah, you can do it. Oh, that's brilliant. I like that idea. That's great. So if a teacher were to come to you and say, right, I'm looking at getting out of teaching and I want to get into coaching, what would be a route that you would suggest would be a good way to kind of to go down that coaching route, do you think?
Well, I would probably say, first of all, to meet with somebody who, or a few people who've gone into coaching, probably somebody kind of early on, but maybe somebody who's been a teacher,
Hmm.
to get that same experience. So somebody, somebody like me, but so potentially not somebody who's been in industry going into coaching, because they would have a natural network.
Yeah.
They will naturally potentially go in as an internal coach into a company. So
Yeah.
if somebody's not had that kind of experience, it might be more difficult to be able to envisage it.
Hmm.
Um, I would say there are a few different coaching schools. I went through barefoot coaching, but there are coaching academy, and then there's some through the sort of Chartered Management Institute. So get trained by a good organization. It's going to be an investment. So you can't just leave teaching and go, I think I'm going to pay for this, and then it's just going to make a new business,
Yeah.
because it does take, they say 2 or 3 years, and I agree with that, unless you've got the natural network, and it's not going to happen straight away. Don't view it as an easy thing, because it takes hard work. But what does work, and people will say you don't want to do it to start off with, is find who you want to work with. What problem do you want to solve? And who do you want to work with? If you can get those two nailed right from the beginning, then your message will be right from the beginning, and you'll have people who are interested in talking to you, and you'll be able to solve a problem.
Yeah.
But without those that everybody is so resistant to, because you want to say, actually, I can coach everybody, which is true, but everybody won't see that message.
No, that's it.
So it's got to speak to that person directly. And the number of coaches coaching for coaches, things I've been to where they tell you that same thing, but because they're in that role, you kind of go, yeah, all right, I'm not going to listen to you. But me, I've listened to it eventually, and it does make a difference.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think time is quite a big factor, isn't it? So for me, I struggled with, so when I come out of teaching, then what that immediate like next step. So I don't know about you, but I stepped back and just did some supply for a couple of months just to
mm,
sort of find my feet and work out what was going to happen and where I was going to go and what sort of business I wanted to create and who I wanted to help, like you say, researching that idea of who you want to help. And that takes time. I'm sort of 12 months down the line, and I still think I'm just about kind of finding, you know, all those ideas that I was already looking at like this time last year. But it does take time. I'm not a very patient person. So I like to
no,
have
that's
it done now. And I guess a lot of teachers work in such a fast environment. They want things done now and instantly. And actually, sometimes it does pay to just take some time and, and let those things settle as you go
And it
through.
might be that part-time, going to a part-time, if you can manage that role, going to a part-time role in teaching,
Yeah.
and so potentially some of the training you could do on as a side hustle. So some people in their business, they can each be trained to be a coach within their work, and they don't have to change it.
Yeah.
But it's certainly having some sort of side hustle. If you've not got income behind you, or a bit of an investment behind you, you're not suddenly going to make money.
Yeah.
That it's really unusual for people to get there straight away. And some people will say, oh, actually, the coaching market's saturated. Not if you've identified who you want to work with.
Yeah. Definitely agree with that.
Um,
The one thing I have noticed with sort of moving into the business world over the last 12 months myself is just how many teachers have started with a side hustle that's turned into something a little bit more that has then enabled them to leave teaching further down the line. And honestly, I've met so many people that are ex-teachers that actually I think teachers make really good business owners because they're very aware of all of the different sort of parts of the business and kind of they're able to keep all of that running and make it work successfully.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So if you could go back and talk to yourself 10 years ago as a teacher, what bit of advice would you give yourself?
Oh, so 10 years ago, I'd have just started, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Ooh, what would I say to myself? That's a very interesting question. Um, Actually listen when people say don't give so much. So if
Mm,
I'd wanted to succeed in teaching, and one of the first things that people would say to me is, you're giving too much, you're not going to be able to do this um, for very long, it's acknowledge that. And I made that choice then when they said,
yeah.
but take it on board a bit more. So recognize that if you are going to keep doing that, it's good to be giving as much as you are. So, those who don't, they may succeed. The students might do okay. But you see some teachers who don't give very much, and you're like, how on earth does that work?
Mm,
So I think I give myself a bit of a pat on the back for putting the effort in and for doing that. But there is definitely something to say, make sure you give some time to family, you dedicate some time to family. So at the end of it, they don't go, who are you? Because there was a bit of that with my husband. I like in an evening, I'd never be free. And he'd be like, well, you're never here normally. So I don't know what I'm doing my own thing
yeah.
because you never work there.
Yeah.
So people aren't used to having a relationship with me. So acknowledge that might happen
Mm,
and put that in place from the beginning. Spend time with family and friends and activities and find a hobby that involves other people so that you don't feel lonely.
yes, I
Because for
love
me,
that.
I worked in a really small department where it was really lonely, and other departments looked like they had a real thing, but mine didn't. So whatever school I was in, it felt quite lonely. So to put in some of the activities I do now, quite crazy activities, where the connections are made outside the teaching, so that you've got something
Yeah.
that will be there even if you choose to stop.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because as a music teacher, very often the department was me and there wasn't
Mm,
anybody else, and it is really lonely, which is something that I want to create with the Teachers Compass, have that
mm,
community of teachers, bring back the staff room and have that sort of connection with other teachers so that if there's things that are happening at school or at home in life, you've got somebody to turn to have
mm.
those conversations that with people that understand. Because I guess my husband's not a teacher, and although he understands from a certain aspect of things, I think unless you've been a teacher, unless you've been in that school environment, it's very difficult to understand what life's like, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Super. So, where can our listeners find a little bit more about you and your coaching and get in touch with you? Where's the best place to look for you?
Oh, can I give you more than one?
Yeah, definitely.
So a lot of people, so I'm York based, so a lot of people find me. So if you want to know how to find me, find me through my Google business profile. So
Super.
it's literally Jenny Sharp Coach. If you look up Jenny Sharp Coaching, I should be at the top. I think there's one other Jenny Sharp Coaching, but you see my face, so you'll know it's me. So I have a TikTok. I have two TikTok accounts, but it's the Jenny Sharp Career Coaching is the one that's more active.
Awesome.
Because I thought I was going to be more of a business coach at one point, so that's where that one was there.
Right.
But career coaching is more what I do. I'm on Instagram, but that's not particularly active, but you'll see some posts. I have my own website, jennysharp.co.uk, so I don't put the coaching bit in there, it's just Jenny Sharp, and on LinkedIn. So
Amazing.
lots of different places.
I will get all those links and we'll put them in the show notes. So if you want to find any more of
Perfect.
Jenny and what she does, then you'll be able to find that in the show notes and go click on the links.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jenny. I hope our listeners have got some fabulous ideas on maybe life after teaching and different ideas. Coaching could be something that they could look into. But yeah, definitely teachers make great business owners and also great coaches, I think.
I quite agree. And thank you so much for having me here, Louise.
You are very welcome. We will definitely be catching up again, and maybe we'll do another podcast episode in a few months' time. Have another catch up.
That would be lovely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'll talk to you all again next week. Have a good week. Bye. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Teachers Compass podcast. If you found this episode helpful, click on the link in the show notes for more resources and support. Don't forget to leave a review on whichever app you choose to listen to us on. Your feedback helps us to reach more teachers just like you. See you next time.